Ladies and gentlemen of the press, members of the public, distinguished colleagues, good afternoon. Just before midnight on Thursday, April 30th, 2026, the Bank of Ghana finally published its 2025 audited financial statements on its website. Since then, the minority has examined the accounts line by line all across the 136 pages that were published. We've also studied with care the propaganda attempt that preceded it by the NDC party, hoping to do a PR spin to take away the gradual rundown of the bank. We've come here this afternoon not to gloat about the things that we forewarned earlier, which have sadly now come to pass. Rather, we are here to share with the Ghanaian people the numbers that the government wanted to hide, the worrying implications of those numbers, and a host of other troubling developments that the Bank of Ghana accounts reveal. We shall also be exposing the untruths that this government has been peddling about the state of the Bank of Ghana. We're doing this with the hope that at least for once, this government will listen and change course so that we avoid the disaster that is staring the bank in the face. Before I turn to the numbers, some of which I'll show you on the screen, I want to begin with a note of caution. And we give this caution respectfully, in good faith, and in accordance with law. Section 58 of the Bank of Ghana Act, Act 612 of 2002, prescribes the sequence for how the central bank's audited accounts should come into the public domain. First, the Bank of Ghana, within the first 3 months after the end of the year, has to transmit the audited accounts to the Ministry of Finance and publish same in the Gazette. And then second, that's subsection 2, the minister responsible for finance is supposed to transmit the accounts to Parliament with comments. The Act does not say that the Bank of Ghana should hand over the accounts to a political party to announce prior to the minister presenting it to Parliament. What happened on that Thursday when the NDC party, including non-MPs, came to Parliament, to the precincts of Parliament to hold a press conference to announce the audited accounts of the Bank of Ghana, was an illegality. Not only was it an illegality, it was an amount, or it was an act of blatant politicization of the Bank of Ghana and its work. The governor, the board, and the government should take note that this politicization of the central bank will create issues for the operational independence and credibility of the bank going forward. And this must stop. Mr. Governor, if you allow the NDC party to dictate to you how to comply with the laws, you will set precedents that will collapse the operational independence of the central bank. The bank is not a political party. The board of the bank is not the majority caucus. The audited statements of the central bank cannot be reduced to a political party's press release. Politicization of the work of the bank is corrosive, and it should not happen again. Now, having dealt with that, we want to take you into the accounts, because the whole exercise of that propaganda thing they did on Thursday was to ensure that people won't pay attention to the accounts, and you will just believe and be reporting everything that they will say, that they've made a loss of 15 billion, it was, for good purposes, etc. We want to take you into the account yourself. And there are 7 key things that we want to draw your attention to this afternoon. First, ladies and gentlemen, is that beneath the propaganda effort that they started on that Thursday, Ghanaians should be worried about something that is hidden in the accounts. And that is that on the watch of this government, the Bank of Ghana has for the first time in our nation's history become policy insolvent. And we shall prove it to you with their own numbers. I want to start by going to page 7 of the audited accounts that they published. Please go to the very top on page 7. And they start by defining what policy solvency is. Please go up to the very top. This is it. And I want to quote from their own accounts. Policy solvency reflects the capacity of a central bank to finance the full cost of its monetary policy operations, principally open market operations and other liquidity management instruments, from its own internally generated income without recourse to monetary financing or extraordinary government support. And this is how it is measured. It's in their own account. Is the difference between the operating income from core activities and the interest cost of sterilization instruments. So when you take all their revenue and then you take out their core cost of sterilization or open market operations, if you are in the positive, if you have surplus, then the Bank of Ghana is still policy solvent. If you are in the negative, then the Bank of Ghana has become policy insolvent. And we regret to inform you that despite all the propaganda, if you look at the numbers, for the first time in our history, the Bank of Ghana has become policy insolvent. Now, let me take you to the numbers for you to have a look. They say in their report that in 2025, the Bank of Ghana recorded a strong policy solvency position, improving markedly over the 2024 outturn. This, fellow Ghanaians, is not true. Now watch. Policy solvency is when you add all the incomes so that you get income from operations 22 billion, and then you deduct the cost of open market operations 16 billion. That is the math that they have done and are explaining that they are 5.5 billion Ghana cedis in the surplus, and that it is markedly higher than the 793 million that the previous managers of the central bank left for them. Now we're going to show you why it is not true. The highlighted line, the line we've highlighted, shows the net gain from the sale of refined gold at 9.5 billion Ghana cedis. To arrive at that 22 billion, they had to sell about 50% of our gold assets to generate 9.5 billion cedis so that they could arrive at 22 billion. The reason is that around October 2025, they realized that they were in the negative. So to cover this up, they employed some clever accounting by hurriedly, and that's why you recall that when we kept asking why was this gold sold hurriedly in the last about 2 months of the year, they couldn't explain, only to say that this year 2026 they were going to start accumulating new gold reserves. It was to generate artificial revenue of 9.5 billion. Now if you take that 9.5 billion out of the other incomes, you will come to 12.7 billion. And now when you deduct the 16 billion from the 12 billion, you will be in negative 4 billion. Colleagues, negative 4 billion puts the Bank of Ghana in policy insolvency. This is the sad truth. This is the truth which the bank discovered in October and thus rushed to sell 50% of our gold reserves to generate artificial revenue to try and cover that deficit or that policy insolvency position. A one-off asset sale to cover the truth is not sustainable. So this year, which asset would they sell to cover it? The Bank of Ghana cannot continue selling assets to cover their policy insolvency. A central bank that needs to sell gold assets to cover up its policy insolvency is operating on borrowed time. The government and the bank, knowing the implications of this, have thus resorted to this clever attempt to spin it away and bury it in an NDC press conference, hoping that nobody will pay attention to the actual details. And as we'll demonstrate later, policy insolvency is as a result, this policy insolvency is as a result of new policies that they have introduced at the bank. The implication of this is that the bank now requires an urgent bailout before it can perform its core mandate. And later this week, we will outline immediate measures that we believe the government should take to restore true policy solvency. Today, we just want to expose this sad fact, which the government is trying to hide from the Ghanaian people, that on the watch of the NDC, for the first time in our history, the Bank of Ghana has become policy insolvent. The second point we want to draw your attention to. The government and its spin doctors, led by the NDC party officials who did that press conference, are trying to convince the people of Ghana that the loss is 15.6 billion Ghana cedis. And colleagues, we don't blame you. We've seen many of you reporting that the loss is 15.6 billion cedis. We regret to tell the people of Ghana that this is not true. The true operating loss of the Bank of Ghana for the year 2025 is 34.9 billion Ghana cedis. And in fact, if you add back the sale of the gold, or the proceeds from the sale of the gold, the 9.6 that I've just shown you, the true comprehensive loss position of the Central Bank of Ghana is 44 billion Ghana cedis. I'll show you with the numbers. As I've mentioned, that gold sale was to reduce it from 44 to 35, and also to remove the policy insolvency that they found themselves into. So I'll take you into the numbers on the next slide. As I mentioned earlier, the Bank of Ghana has employed a combination of artificial revenue recognition on one hand and clever accounting on another hand to try and cover up this loss. Now, this is the consolidated and separate statements of other comprehensive income for the year ended 31st December 2025. Before, the Bank of Ghana did not split its accounts into two. They put all the accounts in one, in accordance with the International Financial Reporting Standards. On the watch of this new administration, they have amended the accounting standards they are using. And now they split it into two and move some into what they call the other comprehensive income. So what you have seen as the 15.6 is only the operating loss that they have declared in the operating accounts. But when you go to the consolidated and separate statements of the comprehensive income for the year ended 31st December 2025, we want to show you something else that they are hoping nobody will look at. Look at the first line. That is the loss for the year, the 15.6 for the bank itself, and 15.3 for the entire group, because you know they have subsidiaries. But as you go down a little bit, you will find that there are other transactions they have done that will culminate, we'll show you another line, go down a bit, that will culminate in a loss of, this is an additional loss of 19.3 billion cedis for the bank and 19.8 for the group. So if you want to see the true loss that the bank has suffered, it's not just the headline 15.6 that they have told you. It's the 15.6 at the top, and then the 19.8 at the bottom. The bank alone, that is 34.9 billion Ghana cedis. That's the true operating loss. And for the group, it is 35 billion cedis. So colleagues, the second point we want to make to you is that, contrary to what they are telling you, that the loss is 15.6 billion, please look into the account. You will find that the 19 billion has been moved into other comprehensive income. And if you put the two together, it's 34 billion. And that's why we're also drawing your attention to the fact that even this 34 billion, they achieved it by artificially generating revenue of about 9 billion from 50% of our gold which they sold. So if you add that back, sadly, the true loss of the central bank for the year 2025 is 44 billion Ghana cedis. Now, they have been going at length to try to hide this. In fact, even before the results were released, they briefed some of you in the media to start writing stories that there was going to be a loss, but it will be lower. I want to refer you, for example, to some of the stories published on Ghana Web days before the publication. It says Ghana Web Business understands that the accounts will first be presented to the audit subcommittee. According to sources, the delay was partly due to a change in external auditors. The central bank is expected to post another operating loss for the period ending 2025, although it is likely to be smaller than the 9.4 of the previous year. And they got many of you to repeat it in other news publications because they wanted to tune the minds of people that the loss has come down. It's not true. It's 34 if you look at it on a consolidated basis. And if you take away the artificial revenue they jumped into it, that's 44. Issue number 3. What is happening at the central bank is that there was recovery that was coming after the initial losses of 2022. And because of the new policy measures that they have introduced, that recovery is being reversed. You'll recall that after the 2022 loss, which loss was occasioned because the central bank had to participate in the domestic debt exchange program and lost about 48 billion cedis at that time, leading to a total loss of about 60 billion. After that, the central bank had been reducing their losses. So in the year 2023, and if you can go to the graph, I'd just like to demonstrate it to our colleagues. In the year 2023, they reduced the loss from the 60 billion. So you'll find on the bar graphs we have here, we've plotted from 2020 coming. So 2020, they were in positive, profit of about 1.7 billion. And so the net equity position went up to about 3.5 billion. In 2021, they made an extra profit of about 1.2 billion. So the net equity went up further, 5.7 billion. But in 2022, when they participated in the domestic debt exchange program, they made a loss of 60 billion. And that is what brought the net equity position, the whole at the Bank of Ghana, to the 54 billion that you see there. But they started reducing the loss. So in 2023, the loss reduced to 13.2, and the whole expanded to 65.3. And then in 2024, the loss further reduced to 9.5, and the whole started closing. So from 65, you see the whole closing is now at 61. What has happened is that now in 2025, because of the measures that they have employed, which have cost us a whopping 35 billion Ghana cedis, which they are trying to hide by telling you is 15 billion. Now, the net equity position, the whole has gotten bigger to 96 billion cedis, as you see there. Indeed, if it was 15 billion, when they were adjusting this, they should have adjusted by only 15 million. But they had to go and adjust by 35 billion, because that is the true comprehensive operating loss. So the third point that we are making to you, sadly, is that the reversal that was coming up at the Bank of Ghana is now, or the recovery that was coming up, is now being reversed, and the position has gotten significantly worse because of the policy decisions there. Now, again, in the propaganda exercise they did on Thursday, they tried to tell the people of Ghana that these accounts have been prepared in accordance with the international financial reporting standards. Again, colleagues, we regret to inform you that that is not true. On page 10 of the audited statements, in a paragraph titled "Emphasis of the Matter, the Basis of the Accounting," this is what the auditors of the Bank of Ghana have written. They say KPMG are drawing attention to note 2A, and they write, and here I'm quoting them directly: "The consolidated and separate financial statements are prepared in accordance with the group's own accounting policies. As a result, the consolidated and separate financial statements may not be suitable for any other purpose. Our opinion is not modified in respect of this matter." I want to translate this into plain language. The accounts are not prepared on full international financial reporting standards. They are prepared on the bank's own internal framework. That's why KPMG could not say that they are prepared in accordance with IFRS, because the accounts were not prepared in accordance with IFRS. They reverted to citing the bank's own internal accounting policy as the standard against which compliance was tested. On page 4 of the same document, the directors themselves, the directors of the Bank of Ghana, say, and I quote, "The recognition and measurement criteria as set out in IFRS accounting standards as adopted by the Institute of Chartered Accountants Ghana have not been applied in these circumstances." They are hoping you won't read, but it's there. And it is because of the adoption of this particular standard that they are able to move the 19 billion from the operating account into what they call other comprehensive income, and let you think that the loss is 15 billion, when the loss is actually about 35 billion. It's 34.9, approximately 35 billion. I want to be clear. I'm not making allegations. I'm reading what the auditor and directors have themselves written into the document. KPMG has flagged it. The directors have admitted it. The basis of accounting is part of the architecture that makes the headline loss look smaller than the underlying economic reality. I want to deal with issue number 5. The government wants you to believe that the losses were for good purpose. And they themselves have explained that there are 2 major causes of the losses. One, the attempt to fight inflation, what they call the open market operations instruments that they used for sterilization. And then 2, there are losses on the gold purchase program of about 9 billion cedis. So let me take you through. They want you to believe that the cost of sterilization, the first part, the 16.7 billion, was an unavoidable cost to pay for disinflation. Colleagues, it was not. Much of it was self-inflicted by 2 policy reversals undertaken by the new management of the central bank. And each one of those reversals was more expensive than the alternative that they replaced it with. They were aimed at ensuring that, so let me explain to you these 2 policies that they inherited. One was the dynamic cash reserve ratio. The other was the CD equivalent reserving requirement. So, you know, banks have to keep a certain percentage of their money at the central bank. And they keep that as a reserve requirement, and the central bank doesn't pay any interest on it. At the peak of the crisis, the managers of the central bank decided that it was important to introduce a policy known as the dynamic cash reserve ratio, which looked at how much of the deposits you have mobilized as a central bank are you lending to the private sector. And if you are not lending the money and you are coming to lend it back to government, they give you a higher reserve ratio so that you bring it to government and they don't have to pay for it. If you don't want that, lend it to the private sector. That was the dynamic cash reserve ratio. It was the first thing that this new administration reversed because they were looking for popularity from the financial community. That's where they started playing politics with the policy decisions. They said it was part of a reset agenda, and so they reversed it. What that meant was that money which was ordinarily coming to the central bank, mopping up which was being done at 0 cost, now they had to pay for it. Second was the CD equivalent reserving requirement. Banks mobilize both CDs and foreign currency. So the rule that was introduced was that when you mobilize foreign currency, the central bank will not take the foreign currency as part of the reserve. They will take the CD equivalent. So what that did was that it took away more CDs from you as a bank without having to pay for it. Why? Because they didn't want you to keep the CD and come and lend it back to the central government under open market operations and pay for it. Again, for reasons of popularity and politics, the central bank new managers just reversed it. Now, I must state from the onset that these were temporary policies. They were supposed to run their full course before they were removed. But I've explained to you how they removed them. When they removed them, the consequence is that now the banks are left with so much liquidity and they have to mop it up. And they are mopping it up at an interest rate. It is this mop up at that interest rate, known as the sterilization that we have been talking about over and over and over again, that they have ended up paying 16.7 billion Ghana cedis for. So it is not the cost of stabilization. It is the cost of policy reversal. It is the cost of poor policy choices, the cost of politicization that has cost them this 16 billion Ghana cedis for money, a good chunk of which they could have received without paying interest on. The other one is the gold purchase program. The original structure of the gold purchase program ensured that bullion was accumulated without making losses. The new administration reversed this policy and now said that all gold should be purchased through the gold board. I'm sure you recall that. It was here in this room that we raised this matter. And then the gold board also found its own intermediaries. Eventually, the Bank of Ghana ended up losing 9 billion